Hello, people. Today's lecture will cover mirror minds, how we shape and are shaped by others, social psychology. So, what is social psychology? Social psychology is the scientific study of how people's thoughts, feelings, and actions are affected by others. Social psychologists consider an individual's different kind of behaviors and causes of those behaviors in social situations. So, what they do is they examine how the nature of situations in which we find ourselves actually influence our behavior. Attitudes influence behavior. The strength of the link between particular attitudes and behavior actually varies. But generally, people strive for consistency between their attitudes and their behaviors. Also, people hold consistent attitudes. Ironically, the consistency that leads attitudes to influence behavior sometimes work the other way around. In some cases, our behaviors actually shape our attitudes. So here we want to look at persuasion. Okay. So persuasion, this is a process of changing our attitude towards something based on some kind of communication. So some of the factors which can influence persuasion include like the credibility of the speaker, the timing, attention, the age, level of intelligence. Okay. So social psychologists have discovered that there are two primary information processing routes to persuasion, which we have the central route and the peripheral route, which you can see in that particular figure. So when we're talking about the central route, this occurs when the recipient thoughtfully considers the issues and arguments involved in the persuasion. So in the central route processing, people are swayed in their judgments by like logic, merit, strength of the argument. Okay. In contrast, peripheral route processing occurs when people are persuaded on the basis of factors unrelated to the nature of or the quality of the content of a persuasive message. Okay. So let me give you an example here. Let's say for the central route, an example is like a car company, they're seeking to persuade you to purchase a car, okay? They'll emphasize the car's safety features, the fuel economy, things like that, things that are data, are facts, about the car to try to persuade you to purchase that. But for the peripheral route, let's say, for example, a commercial has a popular athlete advertise athletic shoes. This is a common method used to like encourage young adults to purchase the shoe. So this has really nothing to do with the actual shoe itself, like the durability, anything like that. It's all about the peripheral route. Like, okay, this particular athlete wears these shoes, so I should as well. Okay, so let's look at two fundamental concepts in social psychology: conformity and obedience. So, around like the mid 20th century, there are a group of social psychologists. They wanted to understand the powerful forces of obedience and conformity. Okay, so the roots of understanding conformity and obedience can be traced back to like the aftermath of World War II. So the world had actually witnessed the consequences of blind obedience and mass conformity during the Nazi time. So psychologists were determined to actually uncover why people conformed to social norms and obeyed authority, even when such actions led to immoral outcomes. So let's take a look at conformity. Okay, so conformity is a change in behavior or attitudes brought about by a desire to follow the beliefs or standards of other people. Subtle or even unspoken social pressures result in conformity. The classic demonstration of pressure to conform comes from a series of studies actually carried out like in the 1950s by a man named Solomon Asch. So, conformity involves adjusting one's behavior or thinking to align with the groups or the group norms or expectations. So, it is driven by the influence of peers and the desire to fit in with a group. Conformity is the act of matching attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors to group norms. So it's a type of social influence that results from real or imagined group pressure. So within conformity, we have normative social influence and we have informational social influence. So looking at normative social influence, these are individuals conformed to be liked or accepted by the group. So an example of that would be like dressing like your friends to fit in at a social event. Informational social influence, this is when individuals conform because they believe others have accurate information. So an example of that would be like asking an officer in a town that you've never visited for directions because you assume that the officer knows the correct directions because, they work in that particular town. So looking at the Asch conformity experiment, let me tell you a little bit about it. Asch wanted to understand how social pressure from a group could influence an individual's decision making, even in situations where clear factual answers were evident. Okay. So in this particular experiment, participants were asked to complete a line matching test. Okay. They had to say out loud which of the three comparisons line matched the target line in length. So there was a twist, right? The participants were placed in a group with several others who were actually Confederates. So that's an actor working with the researcher, okay? So these Confederates were instructed to occasionally give incorrect answers, okay? The results were surprising. About 75% of the real participants conformed to the group and gave the wrong answer at least once, even though the correct answer was obvious. This revealed just how strong the desire to fit in with the group can be and how it can lead people to go against their own senses and judgment. So this experiment is a powerful demonstration of normative social influence when we conform because we want to be liked or accepted, and is still relevant today in understanding peer pressure, groupthink, and social behavior. So let's move on to obedience. Obedience is the act of following orders or instructions from an authority figure, even if it conflicts with personal beliefs or preferences. Now that we understand obedience and compliance with authority, let's look at one of the most famous studies on this topic conducted by psychologist Stanley Milgram. So his research aimed to uncover how far people would go in obeying instructions, even when those instructions actually conflicted with their personal morals. Okay. So Stanley Milgram was deeply interested in how regular individuals could commit harmful acts under authoritative pressures. His inspiration came from the atrocities of World War II. So in his experiment, a participant was asked to actually act as a teacher and administer electoral shocks to a learner for every incorrect answer. Unbeknownst to the participant, the learner was an actor and the shocks were not real. As the shocks increased in intensity, the learner would scream, beg to stop, or fall silent. Yet many participants actually continued because a stern authority figure told them to proceed. Surprisingly, 65% of participants went all the way to the maximum voltage, even though they were clearly uncomfortable. This study actually revealed that disturbing power of authority and how context can override personal conscience. So it continues to be one of the most famous and controversial studies in psychology. So obedience, why? Why do we obey? We obey for several reasons. Individuals are more likely to obey commands of legitimate authorities due to the perceived right of these figures to make demands. An example of that would be like employees may follow unethical orders from a superior because they see them as a legitimate, figure and fear repercussions for disobedience. Proximity of the authority figure can increase obedience. Closer and more immediate presence of authority boosts compliance. For example, like in the Milgram experiment, participants were more likely to administer the shock when experimenters were physically present. Okay. And when another reason is when individuals perceive themselves as merely executing orders, they may feel less personally responsible for their actions. So, an example of that would be a soldier might commit acts that they personally find repulsive if they believe they are not following orders and are, well, if they believe that they're just following orders and are not personally accountable. So let's look at conformity and obedience, okay, together. So, unlike conformity, which is influenced by peers, obedience involves like a hierarchy where someone yields to the directives of someone in the position of power. While both conformity and obedience involve yielding to external influences, conformity is about fitting in with peer groups, whereas obedience is about following orders from authority figures. So, this is a pop in discussion. I want you to answer this particular question now that we've looked at how conformity and obedience shape our actions in response to social pressures and authority figures. I want you to consider a time when you have obeyed an authority figure against your better judgment. How did you feel? What were the consequences? If you have to stop, take a minute to think. Just think of a reason. Okay, good. So let's consider a phenomena that explores what happens when multiple people are present in a situation requiring like help or intervention. So we're going to take a look at the bystander effect. Okay. This is a well-known case in psychology. There's a well-known case, the murder of Kitty Genovese. Like in 1964, Kitty was brutally attacked outside her apartment in Queens, New York. According to like earlier reports, 38 people either saw or heard parts of the attack, but none actually stepped in or called help until it was too late. This is a shocking story, and it led to the development of the bystander effect. So the bystander effect shows that the more people that are present during an emergency, the less likely any one person is to take action. Why is that? Because responsibility actually gets spread throughout. And this is something called the diffusion of responsibility. This is when people often assume that someone else will actually help. This study forced society and psychologists to actually re examine how we respond to emergencies and why we sometimes don't act when we really should. Okay. Thank you guys so much for listening.